Hey, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you happen to see this. I do trust and believe that it will be the right time. So I wanted to greet you all on this new day, Friday Eve, as I like to call it. And I know that yesterday, for many of you who saw the conversation that I had with Steph on the topic at hand, which is the latest mass shooting in America. And yesterday was an emotional day, and it still remains emotional, and it will be that way for some time. I know that a lot of the comments that I saw on yesterday, aside from the emotion around what we are all feeling, was a simple question. And that question is, well, now what do I do? And so I wanted to share some of the things that may help. I mentioned some of them, or we mentioned some of them on yesterday when we had the conversation, but I really spent some time yesterday for myself trying to figure out, okay, what's next? What am I supposed to do here? And so I wanted to just share a few things with you. So today is about, all right, so if there were action that I needed to take, if there's something that I need or want to do, then how do I direct the energy that I know that many of us are feeling? And that energy is in the form of anger and sadness and frustration, and trying to figure out, why are we still here having this conversation? And really, that could be said about a number of things, but today I want to just preface this conversation with a couple of notes, and I had to collect my thoughts here just so that I could communicate it to you in a way that makes sense. And what I'm hoping is that from this conversation, that whoever sees this live, if you see it on the replay, yes, I do want you to hashtag replay and share your thoughts. But what I much rather have is you walk away and say, okay, here are some suggestions for things that I might consider doing. And this is all about being thoughtful. This is about being strategic, I guess, in some way, in terms of what do we do? Because many of us, let's just be honest, feel helpless, and we feel like there's nothing that we can do. And I have felt that way because I've said, oh, we're here again. And so I want to kind of move out of that space and think about what we can do. And so here are a few things. I just want to start this conversation by saying a couple of things. We may not and we will not agree on everything. I mean, that's just human nature. And we shouldn't, because it helps us to hear other perspectives. It helps us to understand different aspects of people's lives, people's thought processes. So to think that we're all going to agree on the same thing all the time is a myth. Now, it's nice when we do, but the reality is we won't. Good morning, Trebby. Happy to see you on this morning. And for anyone who's coming in this morning, I do want to encourage you to share this out, because I want as many people to hear this conversation as possible. I'm also sharing this on my YouTube channel, and so if it'll be easier for you to copy a link and forward it on to someone, then you will be able to do that. But I really had to take my feelings and my emotions, and trust me, yesterday, I mean, I was just in a place, and I'm still in a place, but I'm trying to think of it in a way that helps me to channel that energy into action. And so, back to us not agreeing on everything, the one thing that I will say is that most Americans, and you can research this for yourself, most Americans do support some sort of gun legislation, gun safety laws, whatever you want to call it. And so I think that the fact that 84%, maybe a little bit more now, but the statistic that I grabbed yesterday was actually from March of 2021. So here we are a year after that. And I think that that percentage may have grown. But the number that I have, just for you to have reference, is that 84% of the American people do support some sort of gun legislation. Okay. So Know that off the top. The other thing that I want to kind of dispel in terms of, I'm looking at this as a myth in terms of how we are classifying a solution. Now, to me, this is a complex problem. There's lots of different layers, and we talked about some of them yesterday in my conversation with Steph. We talked about the healthcare system. We talked about mental health and mental illness, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And then, of course, we talked about the gun legislation. Okay, so all of those things wrapped into one package are potential solutions to this problem that we are facing. And so I want to first of all talk about the difference between mental health and mental illness. Now, I am not a clinician. However, I just had an interview with a clinician, Dr. Paula Anderson. We scheduled a conversation about mental health awareness, and then the shooting in Uvalde happened, and it just kind of shifted into even a broader understanding of why we were having the conversation. And so you'll see that conversation. It'll be released on this Saturday for Coffee and Conversation. But here's what she said at the very beginning of the video. And I think it's important to hone in on this. Mental health and mental illness are two different things. So mental health is, we all have mental health. It is how we get up every day and manage our day-to-day activities. And it is our ability to be able to handle work and family and our friends and our own state of well-being. And so we all have that ability. And mental illness, on the other hand, and I'm going to read exactly how she said it, is medically diagnosed. It's an impairment of individuals' cognitive, emotional, or relational abilities. And that can either happen biologically or environmentally because of some shift or something that happens in the brain that triggers certain thoughts and behaviors. Okay? So when you hear people say that the mass shooting issue is related to mental health, understand that what they're really saying is that it is attributed to mental illness. And it might be attributed to mental health as well, now that I say that, because everyone who commits one of these heinous crimes has not been diagnosed with a mental illness. Okay? So what you might hear is that the solution is, well, it's related to mental health. Well, we need mental health hospitals. Well, we need mental health professionals. And so you'll hear all of this language. And while I don't discount that, what I want to be very clear about in terms of my perspective that I want to share with you and something for you to consider is that that is not the only solution. Okay, so you might hear that language constantly, and I do believe that the reason we hear it often is, or I should say the reason we hear it exclusively, is because it is a way not to address the other options on the table. Okay, so again, I'm not saying that mental illness and mental health should not be considered as part of the equation. What I am saying is that when we exclusively say that that is the solution, or we have to focus on that, it is because it is a deflection away from other parts of the conversation that absolutely need to be considered. So I want to make sure that that part is clear. The other thing that you might hear is something that's called whataboutism. And whataboutism is often used when there are challenging conversations on the table, and you'll hear, well, what about this place? And what about this place? One of the things, just to be very direct, is you might hear, well, what about Chicago? And what about Baltimore? Because of the high crime rates that we hear about every single day, gun violence on the streets of our communities. Now, that absolutely has to be addressed. There is no if, no and, or no but about that. But whataboutism also is another form of deflection. And that means that if we say, what about this and what about that, then we really don't have to address this right here. And so, and then it kind of gets wrapped into one conversation, and it's really a couple different dimensions of the same issue, gun violence. So whether it's mass shootings or whether it is violence within our communities on a daily basis, it's all in the same sphere of needing to be addressed, but they should be considered as two separate conversations, but having some of the same solutions to address both of those. Okay, so I wanted to make that clear as well. So now the question is, okay, so what do we do? So I'm going to give you a couple of options, and you get to decide how this works for you. And especially if you say, I'm part of the 80+% who supports some sort of gun legislation. Let me say this first before I go any further. Gun legislation, common sense gun laws, gun safety does not mean, and I want to be really, really clear because you're going to hear this as well, it does not mean that there is an opposition to gun rights. I just want to be really, really clear with that. Common sense gun laws, gun legislation does not mean opposition to gun rights. You and I have the right to bear arms in a legal and safe way. If you choose to purchase a gun legally, to register it, or whatever the process is, or whatever it should be as a result of some of the things that I'm mentioning in terms of gun safety, you have the right to do that. You have the right to protect your family. You have the right to protect your home. You have the right to protect yourself. So common sense gun laws does not equate to, oh, you're trying to take away my gun rights. That's not what this conversation is about. And I want to be really, 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 really clear, because you will hear conversations like that. You may even be hearing it in some of your circles. And if you are, just be mindful that that's not what this is talking about. So there's two bills that passed the House last year. I mentioned this yesterday. One of those is background checks for sales and transfers. So if you're selling a gun, maybe at a gun show, if you're transferring ownership over to someone, there is a background check requirement. That's one of the bills. The second bill is the Charleston loophole. And that bill was as a result of the shooting in Charleston, South Carolina, an African-American church, and parishioners or churchgoers were killed. Okay, so the Charleston loophole is to address that, and I do believe that the person, Dylan Ruth, if I'm not mistaken, been so many of them that I want to make sure I get the name right, but was able to purchase the gun, and so there was some loophole that allowed him to do that. And so I encourage you to research those two bills, but those are the two bills that were passed in the House in March of 2021. Okay, so that leads me to the what can I do now? So here are three things. One, call your local officials. So whatever state you live in, call your local officials and let them know, if you are part of the 80+% of Americans who support some sort of common sense or gun safety legislation, to let your voice be heard. That's the first thing, local officials. So you may be coming in from many different places across this country. So I encourage you to go to your state legislature's website and figure out who those pinpoints are that you need to reach out to. The second is to call our senators in Congress. Now, this is where I spent a good portion of my time on yesterday, picking up the phone, calling various senators. For those whose voicemail boxes were full, I sent an email. And you can do that by going to senate.gov/senators. When you go to that website, you will see a list of all of the senators, and you can give them a call. You do not have to be a constituent of their state or the region that they represent. You can basically say that you are a concerned citizen of this country, and they will take your comment. All right, so that's the second step. And let me just say this. This is not about Republican, Democrat, Independent. Um, it's not about that from the perspective of we as a nation, as a community of people who feel like something has to change. But what I will say is this, is that if you look at the talking points and if you look at the data that's out there, what you will see is that the majority of our Republican representatives are against common sense gun laws or gun safety. Okay. So for me, that's where I started my phone calls. That's where I started my emails, because I looked at the data, I looked at the information to say, okay, what are their stances, what do they believe, and what are they not doing? And so that was my choice. So today I will continue with those phone calls. So again, senate.gov/senators. And then here's the third thing. So November of this year is election season. And so if you feel like those who have been sent to office to represent us are not representing in this particular area. Now I know you might say, well, what if they're representing me for the other areas that concern me? My question, and I had to think about that for myself. My question is, well, do I know that's what they're doing? If something as major as this is being ignored by those that we have sent to Congress to represent us, and it's blatantly being ignored, then how can we be sure that the other things that we are concerned about are being addressed? Are we paying attention to that? So I'm going to say one other consideration is that there's 15 senators who are up for, actually, let me say that correctly. There's 15 Republican senators, and I think there's probably about, 10 or so Democrats who are up for re-election. So if at any point you are concerned about how these officials are representing you and I, then we have some decisions to make come November. And that is simple. Now, I've said this before, I said it yesterday, I will say it again, that my conversation in this space from a business perspective, my focus on helping people to figure out what the best version of themselves is and why am I talking about this political conversation? Well, I'm talking about it because it's connected to our human ability to live and be our best version. I'm connected to this moment connecting to this moment because it is about us making change, moving the barriers that are standing in the way of us being our best. And that best includes the healthiest version of ourselves, making sure that our mental health and our well-being is accounted for. And this is a space, and I went back to this conversation and I was listening to something yesterday and I kept hearing it over and over and over, mental health, mental health, mental health. And it was like, if I could have counted the number of times mental health was mentioned in this conversation, it might have been about 100. And I heard a reporter say this after this press conference, and I thought, you know what, that is spot on. And the comment went something like this, that we are making mental health, and again, mental health, mental illness is not the same thing. I think when the reference is made, what people really want to say is mental illness, but it's being construed into one big bubble. But the conversation is often directed to mental health as the solution, as opposed to considering legislation as part of that solution. And the reporter stated it something like this. Well, what if we did have some legislation in place? Do you think that would then also impact the mental health of the communities that are dealing with this trauma over and over and over? because then we would feel some sense of relief, some sense of peace, because we know that it's been addressed in the way that the majority, again, of the American people desire. That could have a positive impact on the mental health and well-being of each and every citizen in this country. Now, if you want to frame it from that perspective, I'll go along with it. But if you just want to say that it is only attributed to, or mental health is the solution, mental illness has to be addressed, there has to be an expanded conversation, right? That is my thought, and so I'm passing that on to you. So here's the other thing that I want to say. I'm just looking at some of the other notes that I wrote, just to make sure that I'm sharing the things that I want to share. What I will also do, good morning, Kat, good to see you. What I will also do is I'm going to post the list of those senators who are up for re-election, because those are phone calls that you may want to make as well. And you might be watching this and you might be saying, well, you know, she's putting their information out there. And yes, I am. And here's why I'm doing that. It's about accountability. It is about accountability. It's the same as if I were working with a client. One part of a program with me is about accountability. So if we're working together, I'm helping you with strategies to meet your goals, there's an accountability component where I'm checking in with you. Because if this is what you said you were going to do, and you've invested in me to help you do that, then I want to be accountable to you, for you to own up to what you said, and you need to be accountable to yourself to commit to what you said you were going to do. So this is the same thing. So when I say contact your local officials and contact our senators, it is about accountability. And the accountability is because he or she has been elected to work for us, to work for the people. So in working for the people, and I don't just mean one small population of people or one small group, and especially when, again, 84% of the American people, I'm going to say over 80%. Again, that statistic was from March of 2021. And I do believe I've heard a couple different numbers between 84 and like 90-ish%. So the majority of the American people. So when that is a part of the mix, then our conversation with our elected officials who are sent to Congress or sent to your local legislature to represent us needs to come back to that. If you are there to represent me, and this is what I support, then why are you not enacting or legislating what I support? That's the conversation. So I wanted to pass this along to anyone who feels like they're trying to figure out what's next. I also want to go back to some very basic parts of this conversation, because what I want people to hear in this message is, how can I act on this issue? I know we might not agree on 5 other issues, but if you're part of this 80 to 90% and you're trying to figure out what do I do next, then I've given you 3 things to consider. This is where I'm spending my focus, because I felt like, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do? And I want to make sure that if you are asking that same question, as many of you were yesterday in the conversation, then here's a place to start. Now you might say, well, I don't have time to get on the phone. Well, if you have time to call 3 people, hell, if you have time to call 1 person, if you have to call 1 person every day for the next, I don't know, 5, 10 days, maybe that's a solution. I don't know if you all have questions who are watching, but, and I know this conversation might be a little difficult for some people. For a number of reasons. It's difficult to think about the reason why we're having the conversation, because there are 22 lives that are lost, in addition to the ones that were lost 2 weeks ago, not even 2 weeks actually. So I get it. It might be difficult to hear the conversation because you might be saying, well, you're politicizing, and I heard that too. Yesterday, some of the things that I heard, we have to support the grieving families and the communities, and why are we politicizing this issue? And we have to, another thing that you might hear is, oh no, let's not talk about this right now because we've got to be in mourning and we're grieving and the families need support. And that is true. Families do need the support. They are grieving. But my question is this: if we don't talk about this right now, while it's raw and while it's heavy and while it hurts and while we are frustrated, and if we don't start to do something about it now, then when would we do that? And just if by chance we had done something before now, then perhaps now would not be as it is. So I'm sorry. No, I'm not sorry. If you are watching this and you think that I'm politicizing this, I am. Because it is and has been a political conversation that has been avoided. So, yeah, there you have it. So on that note, I just wanted to pass that along because I know how it is in the height of all of what we feel. Emotions are high and people are pissed off. And I mean pissed, P-I-S-T is how I'm spelling it. That's how I felt yesterday. And I thought, all right, so with these emotions, what can I do? How can I channel it? And how can I create something, and hopefully for you to see it, for you to pass it along to the people in your circle, in your community, in your tribe, whether that's on social media, whether it's with your family, whether it's with your friends. And be sure to let people know, like, don't just share, oh, we need to pass gun laws. Don't just share, but like be specific. Give them statistics around, this amount of people are supportive of it. These are the two bills that have been sitting in the House or passed the House, and now they've been sitting in the Senate with no action. Like, be specific so that you're coming to the table. Be specific when people say, oh, it's a mental health issue. Let them know, well, you know what? You and I have mental health because we're dealing with life every single day. Do you mean mental illness? Oh, by the way, yeah, that does need to be addressed. But how about thinking about some other solutions? And you might also hear this. People might say, well, gun laws are not going to keep people from being killed. If gun laws are enacted or gun safety is enacted, it's not guns that kill people, it's people that kill people. Well, all right, okay. So let's say this. To the first point, well, that's not going to keep people. Well, how do we know that? How do we know that? We don't, because we have not tried. So to put that out there and just say, oh, well, that's not going to work because, well, if you haven't tried it, you don't know. The whataboutism, again, is, you'll hear people say that, and it's like, let's keep a couple things separate. This is a broad issue, and it needs a lot of different solutions. So if we address one solution and we put something in place, okay, well, it doesn't quite work, so let's massage it. But we can't just say, well, we're not going to do it because it's not going to work, and you haven't tried it. That's like giving somebody advice about marriage, and you ain't been married. You can't tell me because you don't know anything about it. So unless you try it, you see what works, you fix the points that may not work as well, and you keep making it better. But to not start anywhere is not an answer. It is just an escape route not to address. That's the first thing. The second thing, I lost my train of thought. It was something else I said. So if somebody else remembers that second part that I just mentioned, put it in the chat, in the comments, because I was going somewhere with that. Here's the other thing I wanted to mention, and maybe that other thing will come back, and then we'll wrap up. So the other thing that I have been seeing on social media and on posts is And I know we're feeling so many different things, but things like, oh my gosh, it's just getting worse. Um, we'll never be able to get through this. We'll never be able to fix this. This is never. I'm seeing a lot of that in different conversations. And here's what I want to say. I know that in the midst of where we are and what has happened, that sometimes it is not easy to be hopeful. Sometimes it is not easy to feel like, you mean there will be a solution? Oh, they're never going to do anything about this. It's never going to change because, and let me just tell you, I do believe that money is a dictator of a whole lot of why it has not changed. I'm just being really, really honest. Money has impacted the decisions that have not been made on the 80+% of the American people who say they support this. Let me just say that and be real clear. But here's what I'm going to ask you to do. For as much as you can think about it, we're talking about prayers and condolences, but I'm asking you to think about shaping your language, shaping our language in such a way that we are putting out a different kind of energy. So when we say it's never going to change, even when I hear it's just going to keep happening over and over, I understand the frame of reference for that, but I'm thinking to myself that the more we say that, we are putting something out in the atmosphere. We are creating an energy that then allows that to become the reality. And so what I'm asking us to do is to even be mindful of what we are speaking and how we're speaking about this situation. So as opposed to us saying it's never going to change, maybe we say it will change when we take the action. It will change when we hold our senators accountable. Then that means we have to do something, right? And as opposed to saying it's going to keep happening over and over, maybe we say we can stop it from happening when we. See, the language is a little bit different. And so that coupled with your phone calls, with your emails, with your prayers, with your condolences, those are the things that can really create a flow of energy, a flow of activity that does cause change. And I know that's not always an easy thing because we're so used to saying it because we're seeing it all the time. And I get it. But if we could just stop for a minute and just say, okay, how am I getting ready to say this? Am I going to say it in a way that helps me to create the reality that I'd like to see in my communities, in this nation? Because words do have power and words do create. And along with those words is the action that fuels what we are creating with the words and the thoughts and the prayers and the condolences. So I wanted to put that out there because if yesterday I was like, if I see one more post, it's just getting worse. It's just getting worse. Well, how about saying, you know what? I believe it's going to get better. I believe it's going to get better. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but I believe it's going to get better. And we are part of the solution with helping to make it get better. And you might feel like, well, I'm just one person. Well, guess what? You're one person who can perhaps do the things that I suggested. Call your local officials, call your senators, us.gov. No, that's not right. Nope. Senate.gov /senators. Okay. You get the list of all the senators. You get their phone numbers. You get their emails. Call their offices. Think about the ballot box come November and do our research from now until November. See who's on the ballot. See what their messaging is. See what they're thinking about. See where they're getting their money from. And if it goes against something that you know supports this particular issue, then think about where you're putting that vote. So, Angel, good to see you on this morning. So here's the final thing I'll say. Again, this is going to be on YouTube. So if you want to share this out and it's easier, I will post the link here in this conversation. And I implore you to go back through, listen to it carefully, pull out the bullet points that you need. So when you are picking up the phone to call, you might be saying, so Angel says, sadly, people are feeling hopeless and helpless. I don't think people are able to process this without emotion to think through the next step. I get it. Let me tell you, Angel, this is where I was. yesterday and what's today? Thursday. So Tuesday and yesterday, that's where I was. And I'm still there. And that's why I'm sharing it, because I recognize that people may be in a space where they're trying to figure out their own emotions and next. And that's why I'm sharing this, because I'm trying to navigate through this space myself. And I'm hoping that if people cannot process and cannot figure out, okay, how am I dealing with this? Then you can go back to this conversation and say, okay, now that I've cleared my head a little bit, now that I'm not crying as much, or I'm still mad, but okay, I'm going to take this mad and this angry and I want to put it somewhere, then come back to this conversation. But I needed to get it out of my head, out of my space, because this is a direction, these are some things that I'm doing, and I thought if other people need to know what to do, then let me share it. So that's a valid point, and I appreciate you sharing that, because that's real talk. Now, yesterday, I probably couldn't have had this conversation, because as I was on the phone and I was walking around my kitchen on the phone talking to different senators' offices, the tears were flowing, and I could hear and they could hear the frustration in my voice. So I get it. But I needed to put this down in some kind of logical whatever order or what have you, and give it to you so that you can decide how you want to use this, if you want to use it, and if you decide to share it out to your community. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that feedback. So on that note, I do want to thank you for being here in this space with me. I want to thank you in advance for whatever you choose to do in response to this horrific, and I can't even begin to, I feel like that doesn't even sum it up. I want us to be prayerful, not just for the families of these latest victims. They definitely need our prayers. They need to know that they are being held up in the highest regard for strength and for peace and for comfort. I pray for community members. I pray for the first responders who had to be part of the team to process that scene, because my brain can't even comprehend what that was like. I pray for every mother, every father who has a child, and you're wondering, I'm sending my child to school and I need to know that he or she is safe. I am a mother. So I pray for us. I pray for every teacher, every administrator. I pray for every janitor inside of our schools. And I pray for our elected officials, that they would have the wisdom, and that their hearts and that their minds would be pricked around this issue. It is my prayer that they remember who they represent. It is my prayer, and I know this is a high prayer that only God can answer, but it is my prayer that whatever power is associated with the roles that they have and the seats that they sit in, that power would be relinquished in such a way that they then remember, oh wait, we are here to represent the people. And some of the people that we've been representing to this point are not the people who are most important in this conversation. It is my prayer that the oath that they took to represent us and the God that they prayed to when they did it is the same God that they are praying to, asking for the same wisdom that I'm praying in this prayer. It is my hope that the language that we speak to one another on a day-to-day basis outside of this situation and in this situation is one of love and compassion, yes, but is not one of deflection. It is one of addressing a complex issue, yes, and it is one where they get to use the wisdom, the knowledge, the smarts that they have to be able to come up with reasonable solutions to this problem. That's why we sent them there, right? And that's why they said they could do the job, is because they could bring to the table the solutions that represent the people of this country. It is my prayer that they remember that. And on this space and in this space, I'm hoping that you can agree with me in prayer on these words. So we are going to trust that we move through this space with all of our emotions and all of the feelings that we have. We will do that together. We will lift one another up, and we will continue to believe that any action that we take as a result of this conversation and others that you may be having outside of this space will be the needle that moves this to the next space. And that is safety for each and every one of us. That's you, your children, your family, your friends, your coworkers, everyone that you and I are connected to. So I do thank you. I look forward to seeing you all again real soon. Until I do, take care of yourselves. Be well, be encouraged, be mindful, and decide, be prayerful about what you will do when this conversation is over. All right? I love each and every one of you. Take care, and I'll see you again soon.